Hey everybody, it is Tuesday morning and we are going to come in here and get the fish room turned on, and then we're going to do a quick trip around the world. It's been a little while since we've done one of those, so I always start by turning the overhead light on. That gives the whole room a little bit of light, lets all the fish know that the morning time is coming without just blasting them immediately. The next light I turn on is my big overhead LED. That is a grow light that blasts the light down here onto my waterfall tank. It also spreads some light over that way and gets everybody here in my discus tank up and going. I got a switch back here that turns this whole entire side of the room on, including my quarantine tank, my snail tank all the way on the end, my native tank, and of course my big 125 gallon tank. So if we come over here, I have another switch on a plug strip, and when we flip that switch it turns on this whole side of the room, and so we get everybody all the way over to here lit up. And so once everybody's lit, I can turn the overhead light off, and then we can get started on our update. I'm going to make it quick today. Don't want to spend too much time on each tank, and there's really honestly not a ton to cover, so we're just going to sort of go over everything pretty quickly. I'm going to try to keep this about a 20-minute video today. So the waterfall is still just ticking over. I'm still on the fence about whether or not I'm going to break this thing down this summer. I don't know if I'm going to rebuild a new one or not. I've just kind of put all that on hold mentally. I'm not really even thinking about it. I'm just sort of making sure everything stays up and running. And of course we've got lots of hair algae growing all over everything, and at this point it's just a matter of keeping basic maintenance up and running. As far as the tank goes, I do have a very old angelfish in this tank. It is all the way in the back there. You can just about make it out back there. And it had some fin rot and some other issues going on where it had some red raw areas of tissue on its dorsal fin. I did treat the tank with doxycycline and I got all that cleared up. So the fish is now healthy in those regards, but it's still a very old fish. It's on its last legs, and we're probably not going to have that angelfish for too much longer. I probably need to get in there and do another water change to remove a little more of the medication. The medication does stain the water, but this also has a lot of tannins in it, and that's why the water looks so dark and tea stained. So probably not a bad idea to get in there and do another water change. You can still see some foam left over from the medication. I did do a water change after the medication, but I could probably stand to do another one. So that's all that's really going on in the waterfall tank. My little foot tank here is still just ticking over like it always does. One of these days soon I'm going to get in here and we're going to actually remove a lot of that mulm you can see built up on the bottom. It has quite a lot of mulm built up on the bottom. In fact, that is the pump that pumps the water back up to the top, and that's almost completely submerged in the mulm. That's a fairly significant size filter, and only the top half of an inch of it is actually sticking up out of the mulm on the bottom. So we'll get in there, we'll get that all cleaned up, and we'll see what happens. It's probably going to wreck the tank because that mulm is probably a significant part of the nitrogen cycle in this tank at this point. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But that is something I'm planning on doing one of these days, if nothing else, just for the sake of being able to shoot a video about it. So let's get that light turned out, reduce a little bit of the glare on some of our other tanks as we make our way around the room. So my 29 miscellaneous here needs a water change. I was thinking about topping it off, but it's been long enough since I've done a water change that probably wouldn't hurt to just get in there and do it. This is one of those tanks that just ticks over like a clock. I never really have any issues with it. I never pay a lot of attention to it. I don't do a lot of maintenance on it. It's just that when the water level gets low, I top it off, and then we go from there. So now it needs not only to be topped off, but you can see the filter is black flowing through the middle there. So the filters need to be changed, and when I look closely at it, I can really start to see some crud and stuff developing on the glass, so it probably wouldn't be a terrible idea to get in there and wipe the glass down. This tank doesn't need that very often, but once or twice a year I do have to get in here and wipe the glass down. You can see my angelfish hiding back there. So as you saw, we just got the lights turned on this morning. It's not out of the question that we might find an unexpected dead fish in one of the tanks, or who knows. A lot of the fish are probably still going to be laying low and hanging down in the dark because of the lights just coming on. So we'll have to see what we see as we make our way around the room. So moving on to my 55-gallon tank. I was having issues with this tank with the filter, but it turns out that was simply user error. I was having some leaks in the filter, but it turned out that it was just the O-ring was dirty. Once I cleaned that up and got a nice fresh clean O-ring on it, all the leaking stopped. I've unplugged it, I've let it sit without power, and I don't get any backflow. I don't get any of that siphoning effect that I was getting before. And so again, I was poo-pooing all over the filter, saying that the filter was leaking, but it was not the filter, it was user error. It was simply me not getting in there and keeping the filter clean enough. So once again, my hat's off to those Sun filters. I really like them. They're just fantastic filters for the price. They just run and run and run for years without problem. Again, if you do a little bit of proper maintenance on them and keep them clean, you won't have any problems with them like I occasionally have. Again, user error, not a problem with the filter itself. And I do believe we have a dead fish now that I'm looking around. That platy in the back does not look alive to me anymore, so I'll have to get in there and double check. I saw one the other day that was laying in the Java moss right there, and it didn't look very good, but it still was alive. I just didn't think it was going to be for very much longer, and I guess that one in the back is the one we were looking at. So this tank probably does not need a water change. I just did a really big water change on it not long ago, but I do need to wipe the glass down again. This tank, the glass gets algae growing on it very quickly. I have a pretty significant amount of lighting in this tank, and I also have a lot of that hair algae, and so when given the opportunity, it really takes off. So we need to get in there and wipe the glass down. I will probably do a little bit of a water change just because, you know, when I'm wiping the glass down, having the water all the way to the top as I'm splashing the water around and it sloshes around, it's easier just to drain some water out of the tank when I'm wiping the glass and then fill it back up when I'm done. And it amounts to about I don't know, a 10% water change. You know, I take that much out of the top of the tank, and so it's a nice quick little water change. I get the glass wiped down, tank looks good, and we move on. So that's all we got going on in here, nothing special. This tank, as you may or may not know, I just did a really big water change on this tank, and I wound up losing several fish afterwards. And I'm not 100% sure exactly what happened with that. I've talked about it in some other videos, and I will simply recap in this video by saying that every single fish that died during that event was a fish that was very, very close to death anyway. I had several fish in this tank that I was just kind of literally waiting for them to die. One had a swim bladder issue I've been having trouble with for a while. Two of the other ones were just getting really old. One of them was even swimming funny already before the water change. He was swimming kind of half sideways. Two of them were guppies, and they were both guppies that had the crooked spines and were already a couple of years old. So they were crooked spine guppies that were already 2 years old or more. And again, these are all the fish that I lost during the big water change. All of the fish that were younger and healthy and don't have issues were just absolutely fine, and I haven't had any problem with anybody since then. So I'm not going to worry too much about it, but I will still throw that word of caution out there when you're doing water changes. Unless you really, really know what you're doing and know what your water chemistry is, and you know what the starting water is, you know what your tap water is, and you have a really good understanding of those changes that are going to occur during a very large water change, I don't recommend doing the very large water changes unless you know all that stuff. Unless you're 100% sure, then I would stick to doing more frequent but smaller water changes rather than do what I do, which is wait for long periods of time and then do really big water changes. That's probably not the best way of doing it. So more frequent and smaller water changes, just as a rule, is probably going to be better. I know there's lots of exceptions and there's tons of nuance, but as a rule, in a general sense of things, it's probably better to take the more frequent but smaller water change approach in an overall sense. So moving on to my 40 breeder. Not a lot going on in this tank. We are still in the process of getting it cleaned up. It is cleaning up quite nicely. I'm really happy with the way it's starting to look. We're finally getting on top of all that blackbeard algae. We are even getting on top of some of the cyanobacteria. I got in there recently. I did another siphon. I pulled a bunch more crud out of the tank, and so it's really starting to look nice and cleaned up and a lot better. And not too long, I think it's going to be time that we start thinking about what we're going to put in this tank as far as stock. Right now I have one amazing angelfish in here, but this angelfish is not meant to be in this tank. I'm just kind of keeping it in there as a grow out tank. This is going to eventually go in my New World tank, which we'll be looking at in just a moment. So I don't think that angelfish is going to be the fish that goes in this tank, and so I'm still open for ideas of smaller fish. I originally had crebensis in this tank, and I had bred the crebensis in here, and now that I don't have a whole lot of other fish, I've kind of thought about doing that again. But at the same time, I've already done that. Why do it again? You know, I should probably take the opportunity to do something different that I've never done before. And so there's lots of possibilities with this tank. Remember, that angelfish is probably not going to stay in this tank. It's just in there growing out right now. And of course, its coloration and everything looks fantastic. And it goes very well with the color scheme and everything in this tank. That nice tans and browns and golds and earth tones in there. It's just a beautiful looking fish. Really happy with the way this one looks. I know we haven't gotten a good look at it yet. That's kind of a good look at it. There you go. There's a little bit better look at it. So I'm really excited about this one. Can't wait to see it grow up and how it's going to look. One problem with trying to admire angelfishes is they always point at you and they look towards you, so you got to keep going back and forth to try to see their side view. So there's a good look at its side. Really looking forward to watching this one grow up. Love it. Alright, so that fish is eventually going to make its way into this tank, which is my 125 gallon New World tank, and it has mostly New World fish in it. It does have a couple of African fish in it, or Old World fish. One of those being my West African spotted tilapia, you can see hanging out in the back there. And I got my bluegill sunfish. I've got a bunch of South American silver dollars. I have some spotted silver dollars. I have some standard silver dollars. And then I've also got a bunch of North American. These are golden shiners. I've got a white suckerfish on the bottom of this tank. That is another native fish I caught here myself. You can just about make its face out right there. That is a white suckerfish. Just gave us a little blink. And then somewhere in here I have a jewel cichlid, which is another African fish. And then I've also got a rainbow shark. And there's my two golden shiners right there. I also have a rainbow shark, which I believe is, I want to say Indonesian, but I'm not 100% sure. Speaking of the devil, there's my rainbow shark right there. So ultimately someday my angelfish will be in this tank. Oh, I also have a very big Pleco in this tank somewhere, but I do not see it at the moment. It's usually hanging out on or around this big piece of wood right here. In fact, it's probably under that big piece of wood right there. There it is right there. That's its face. That little part to the left are its lips pointing downwards, and then that's its head facing off to the right, and then its body goes off back behind the rocks and stuff back there, so you can't actually see it. And that is a very grumpy looking fish when you look at it straight on. That looks like a scary fish when you look at it straight on. But that's my big bluegill. Don't know if that fish is going to stay in the tank long term. It's getting really big and it's getting really aggressive, so part of me wants to get it out of there just to make some more room in the tank. But a big part of me really wants to see how big I can get that, because I don't see them this big out at the reservoir. When I go out fishing, this is now probably bigger officially than any bluegill I've ever caught in my life. I know they do get bigger than this, and that's kind of my point. I'm kind of curious to see how big this will actually get if I just leave it in the tank, because again, that is way bigger than any fish I've ever caught out at the reservoir. I mean, look at that thing compared to the size of my hand. if I was holding that, I mean, that's a lot of fish to catch if you're catching bluegills. So again, I'm really curious just to see how big I could actually get that fish to grow. So it'll be in there for a while at least. So we'll see how that one plays out. This is my snail tank. We'll have a quick look at this. I just breed snails in it. It's not really complicated. It's just a tank that I float. I usually put some either poultry grit in the bottom, which is crushed aragonite. That's what all that white granular stuff is. And then I'll throw a cuttle bone in there just as a source of calcium. And then this is all Java moss, and that actually functions as my living filter, but we really need to get in there and clean that out because it's time for a filter change, I guess you could say. When we look at the inside, you can see it's really growing well beyond and below where that filter is, and so I really need to get in there and get that filter cleaned up and get the tank topped off, and then we'll go from there. So moving on to my native tank, I've got this big piece of pothos. It starts over here, it wraps around the tank, it comes up to the front, comes out. I've got it up and over, and it goes all the way around and down this side and down, and it sticks out on the front of the waterfall. So that's where the end of that pothos is that right there. And so other than the pothos, I've got all this. This is just water sprite. This is all just growing up out of the back. That's actually just one big water sprite plant down there. This is all Java moss, believe it or not. I planted it on there. I just threw some Java moss on that piece of wood, and it rooted in and started growing. All of this water sprite is actually attached to the to the wood, and is just growing directly off of the wood at this point. The water flow is extremely slowed down right now, but I can fix that just by knocking a bunch of snail shells off of the front of the intake pump back here. Hang on a minute, let me do that. And so just a simple cleaning of the filter intake. It gives me a lot more water flow. So as far as the fish that are in this tank, it's just mosquito fish, native gambusia, and some red Wag Platies. They are breeding in there occasionally, even though that water is filthy looking. That's just mulm swirling around. That's not actual cloudiness in the water. That's just physical stuff in the water. When the water gets to flowing like that and the fish swim around, there's so much mulm in this tank. I don't really have any real filtration. The only filtration is the biological filtration within the tank, and then I got a power head in the back that keeps the water circulating. Even when this does get clogged up and I don't get a lot of water movement through the pump, I still have a power head in the back that keeps the water moving around. And as long as we got good water circulation, I get all my biologicals taken care of and everything is just fine. It's just that because I don't have any filtration, you can see how the mulm and everything just builds up on the bottom, and then as soon as the fish swim or the water flows, it just swirls that stuff up and gets it all flowing around. So I probably need to get in there with the gravel vac one of these days and get it all cleaned out. But likewise, if I gravel vac it, it is probably going to wind up disrupting the nitrogen cycle, and who knows what's going to happen. I'll probably cause more problems than anything if I get in there and do too much in the way of cleaning all that mulm and stuff out. But I honestly don't even really think about this tank in the way of the fish that are in it anyway. I always tend to think of this as more of a sort of open-topped, fountain-y, garden-y kind of setup, more to enjoy from the top down rather than the fish that are in it. But again, that's just me. I don't know, we'll do something with this tank one day. It's just kind of sitting there for now. So moving on to my, what we're going to call my discus tank, my 125 gallon tank. This end of the tank is really dim and dark and hard to see in there, and that is because I have a sea of lily pads on the top there, which is awesome in one way. You can see it really has a lot of fish hiding underneath it. My rainbow fish are under there. Several of my discus are under there. My snakeskin gouramis hanging out under there. Everybody likes chilling out underneath of the lily pads. This fish here, now that we're getting a look at it, is starting to concern me. That is my Lavender Gourami. And look how big and round her belly is. She's getting really, really bloated in the middle there. And it's to the point where I don't think she's just like a fat, plump girl. I think it's actually starting to become bloat at this point. And I've been thinking about it more and more. And I think what the issue is since I put the discus in the tank, I've been feeding the tank a lot more frequently. And I've been feeding the tank a lot higher protein foods. And gouramis are not real good with the high protein food. See, look how fat she is. She's enormous. Gouramis are not really good with the high protein food. Gouramis are more vegetable eaters in the wild. They will eat bugs and insect larvae and stuff like that, but they predominantly eat vegetation. So they usually have a very high fiber and a lower protein diet in the wild. And so you start giving a gourami lots of high protein foods and you start winding up with issues like that. This is not the first gourami I've seen get swollen up like that. And it probably won't be the last, but I am definitely concerned about her. And I think it's just because I've been feeding the tank so much. So I'm going to go back to feeding it a little less frequently. Again, my goal is not to make these discus as big as I can possibly make them. I just want them to stay healthy and happy. And I've never had another fish that I've gone out of my way to feed multiple times a day to get big and so on and so forth. As long as they're getting a decent amount of food every day when I feed the tank, just like I normally do, I think they're going to be just fine. My real concern with the discus is not about getting them big. I'm not concerned about how big they get as their overall size, but their digestional tracts are very narrow. They're a very, very laterally compressed fish, and therefore they got to squeeze all that intestinal tract into one very narrow package. And so it is easy for them to get constipated if they eat large quantities of food in any one sitting or floating. So that's the reason ultimately for feeding them multiple times throughout the day. It's not to maximize the amount of food they're getting. It is simply to make sure they get small amounts of food periodically throughout the day, and then that way their systems don't get backed up. The problem with that is everybody in the tank gets fed several times throughout the day. I've also been having issues with my tenopoma down here getting all swollen up and looking too big, and so I'm going to need to do something with that. Had to do a double take. I thought I had a dead fish on the intake back there, but that is just a leaf or something. I'm not really sure what that is on the back filter back there, but it's definitely not a fish. I'm not sure what that is. It almost looks like maybe a paper label came off of something. I'll have to get in there and pull that off of there and see what that is, but it's definitely not a dead fish, so I'm not worried about it. So that's all that's really going on with my discus tank here. I do still need to get in there and do a little more water changing. I treated this tank with medication as well, and there is still a little bit of that staining in there. That water's still not fully cleared up yet. We do have a little bit of that sort of cloudy looking color, a little bit of that sort of brown. It's not quite a tannin stain color, it's more of a brownish kind of color, and so I am still dealing with that a little bit. But otherwise, you know, everything's going okay in the tank. I just think I'm having a little bit of issues with the overfeeding problem, and so hopefully we'll be able to do something about that. So moving on to my 20-gallon tank. Not a lot to talk about with this tank. I've just got my German blue ram in here, doing really well. Absolutely love this fish. It did have a mate, but unfortunately with the open top tank, it is not unusual to lose fish to jumping. And I came down one morning and unfortunately found his mate all dried up on the carpet in front of the tank, and so now he's in there by himself. If I could seriously guarantee that I got another female, I might try to get a female to get a mate in there for him. But there's two problems with that. First of all, as I already mentioned, there's no guarantee that I could get a female. And secondly, there's no guarantee, even if I did, that they would pair off. Cichlids don't pair off like that. Cichlids pair off based on choice. They don't just get together because you put a male and a female in a tank together. If they don't get along, then they don't get along. And so there's no guarantee that if I put a female in the tank, this one would pair off. He might hate her and might fight constantly, and it might actually cause more problems than anything. So I'm probably just going to leave it alone. and he's just gonna spend his days alone like most of my cichlids usually do. I usually keep my cichlids singularly, and then that keeps the aggression in the tanks down. A lot of people have a problem with that. A lot of people think it's not fair that I should have a mate for them, but I'm not too worried about it. I spay and neuter my cats, and I don't see any reason why, you know, keeping a fish single is going to be that big of a deal either. In the back there, you can see a bunch of my little Ember Tetras. Those are those little red fish, and then of course the larger red fish you can see dashing around are the red Wag Platies. I have those everywhere because I got a tank full of them breeding upstairs in my office. So this tank just got some maintenance. Probably could use a little bit of a top off. For some reason I keep this tank fairly warm. It's not too bad today. It's probably upper 70s. I think I've been trying to get the temperature down a little bit, but with it being open topped, I also have, if you'll notice down here, that is a fan, and if you see the air movement, the leaves and everything are blowing. I just have air blowing down the length of the room here so I can blow on out the doors when I have the curtains open, and that just helps keep the room from being so stuffy and moist and, you know, getting all sort of damp and musty smelling. It just keeps some good air circulation going. But you can also see what it does for evaporation out of a warm open top tank. I really lose a lot of water to evaporation out of this tank. I have to do top offs fairly frequently. So this tank did just get some maintenance. It's just ready for a top off again. I also recently planted some fern in here. I can't remember what kind it is, but it's supposed to be fern that does better in high moving water, in fast currents. So I put a piece of it there in front of the filter, and I put a piece of it down there, not really getting any kind of current on it at all, but it is still down there and doing okay. It looks like it overcame its initial shock and is starting to green back up, so hopefully we'll have a new species of fern growing in some of my tanks. And then of course my Ludwigia here is growing pretty much out of control. This is all one piece, and then this is the other one. So I need to probably get in here and cut this one about right here, and then I can take that whole section and transplant another section. I could probably cut that into two sections and transplant them. So plenty of Ludwigia going on in there. Coming down here to my quarantine tank, I've got a red Wag Platy that lives in this tank. It just kind of lives in the tank. Don't know why, but it's just always been in there. And then the tank that's the fish that's currently in quarantine is this Albino Angelfish. The lights in this tank are on the fritz, that's why it's really dim. So we're not going to get too much of a look at the angelfish, but this is going to eventually end up in my wife's tank upstairs. And it'll be probably fairly soon. You can see the lights are flickering and everything in there. I think this is one of those LED retrofit, and it's on the fritz. It's not really working at all. The lights are really dim. I need to get in there and change that out. But again, it's just a quarantine tank, so it's not that big of a deal. I think that's going to be another good looking fish once it gets a little bit bigger. So really looking forward to that one too. So last but certainly not least is the tank that we will not really even be able to see in, and this is my 40 breeder, formerly brackish tank. This is Butterbean's tank. You can see him making his way behind the curtain there. So this tank has two light fixtures on it. It's these shop lights. This tank is also the tank that I pile everything on top of. But I have these two shop lights on here. I really like them. They're 3 feet wide. They're flat on the bottom. They're very low profile. They're not really high temperature or anything. Again, I can lay these cloth material right over top of it. It's an LED, so it's not warm at all. That's maybe 110 degrees or something. It's like a warm day, basically. It just feels like a sunny day. So it's not warm at all. I'm not worried about that. Low profile, etc. I keep one on the back of the tank, and that stays lit all the time. That's the one that comes on when I flip the switch and the lights come on. But recently that one burned out, and so I wound up moving just this one to the front of the tank, so I'd have this here for the sake of shooting video, because it's really tough to shoot video in this tank when only that rearward light is lit. So I have this secondary light that actually has a switch on it, and this is the one that should be in the front of the tank. And then when I want to shoot video of it, or I want to stay in here and talk about it or whatever, I can flip that switch, the light in the front of the tank comes on, we can look in the tank, and then when I'm done I can flip the switch and it goes out, and we don't get this I get all of this when I get light up in the front of the tank. It just grows on that glass like crazy. Now, regular viewers will know that we normally see all of that in the back of the tank. We all that hair algae growing all over the spray bar, and it grows all over the rocks and everything back there. That's when the light is in the back of the tank. If you put the light in the front of the tank, it does this. All that stuff grows up here. And so that's why I don't keep this light lit constantly. I only light it when I need it. And so that's really the only thing I'm waiting to do. It's just a matter of clearing all this crap off of here and just moving this light to the back and putting this light on the front, and I'll be done. And so Butterbean's tank will be back up and running and ready to go. So we'll get in there soon. We'll get that cleaned up. We'll get that light fixed, and we'll shoot an update on Butterbean's tank. And that brings us all the way back to where we started, more or less. Get a little better look at that angelfish now. You also get a little better look at what I mean about needing to get that glass cleaned off, because I definitely need to get in there and do that. So, all right, everybody, thanks for taking that little trip around the world with me. Went a little longer than I thought it was going to, but we covered a lot of ground today, and it's been a long time since I've done one of these, so thanks for bearing with me. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and I also do private live streams for my members. If you're interested in a membership for $2.99 a month, you will get access to private live streams, which are always a lot of fun. We usually have a good time, cut loose a little bit. They're non-monetized, so I'm a little more free with what I can say and do. So again, if you're interested in some behind the scenes kind of stuff, check out my membership area. $2.99 a month gets you full access. So thanks for watching this one. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget to ring that bell, and I will see you real soon on the next one.